What is up, everybody? Welcome into Hoops 360. Happy Thanksgiving week. Hope everybody's enjoying some very well-deserved and nice time off, some time with some family, but also some time in front of the TV watching some women's college basketball because it is feast week, and that's exactly why we're coming to you just a little bit earlier than we normally do. So in today's episode of Hoops 360, we will break down everything that you need to know about feast week, the structure, the teams, the format, some players to watch, and some potential tournament implications. We'll talk about all of the chaos, the matchups, the players to keep an eye on, some bold upset predictions, so do not miss a beat. So before we get into all of that is Feast Week, just want to remind everybody that you can send us some questions, anything that you want us to touch on, a question, a comment, a concern, maybe a rebuttal to one of the takes that we may have. We are here to discuss it on the podcast, so send us a message at hoops360@yahoosports.com. All right, let's get into it. She is Cassandra Negley, our women's basketball extraordinaire here at Yahoo Sports. I am Caroline Fenton. Cass, happy Thanksgiving week. Happy Feast Week.
Thanks. Same to you.
Thank you very much. Best time of the year. And I will say that 17,000 different times throughout the year. Before we get into everything that we want to watch, everything that we have in our eyes on, some people that might be new to Feast Week, some people that are just getting their toes, dipped into the deep end of all things women's college basketball. Set the table for us, Cass. What's Feast Week?
It's a feast of basketball is what it is, alongside your turkey. Feast Week, I'm pretty sure, was named by ESPN as part of kind of their marketing of games, but it's affectionately just a whole bunch of college basketball. They are multi-team events. They are not all tournaments, but you have a whole bunch of these teams traveling to locations with other teams, playing marquee games. It's an opportunity for teams to build chemistry. You're doing it during a holiday week in the college schedule, so you kind of have a little bit of time off. And then we're going to get into it, but you are playing top tier level talent in some of these cases that is going to help build a resume or help see what your team needs to improve as we continue through the non-con schedule into the conference and eventually into March. March is a long ways away, but when it comes time around, we're going to look back at these tournaments and see how teams were able to build their resume through them.
Okay, so you use the term multi-team event. Not a tournament necessarily. We'll have some tournaments sprinkled in throughout Feast Week, but not all of them are tournaments. Break down the distinction of that for us.
So you have some that are your traditional tournament, right? As you know it as. We're going to get into the Players Era tournament. That is 4 teams. You have your semifinals. Winners play the finals. Losers play a third place game. There are a lot, though, in other locations that are just a bunch of teams, and you have your set schedule. On day 1, you play X team. On day 2, you play Y team. On day 3, you play Z team. And that's what it is. There is no kind of moving through a bracket. It's just these are the games that you're playing.
And great opportunity, like you said, to boost your resume in March. These are all, not just contributing to your regular season wins and loss totals, but this is a resume boosting opportunity. You bring up the Players Era tournament, and I want to take a deep dive into it before we get into the teams and the players and the coaches, because it is star freaking studded. This tournament is absolutely fascinating, and the teams that are participating, the players that we're going to be watching, and obviously, of course, their coaches as well, but the structure of the tournament and the tournament itself, I think, is fascinating because it is one of a kind. That we are seeing players and teams directly financially benefit from the tournament itself. Every team that is participating will get $1 million, at least $1 million, toward their name, image, and likeness. Cass, the Players Era tournament, the first of its kind in the women's side, is fascinating.
Yeah, it guarantees that these players are going to make money off of a high caliber elite competition that a lot of people are probably going to watch. And we are hearing this all the time, right? This is kind of the crux of the WNBA conversation in terms of their CBA. Are players making revenue when everyone else is making revenue? And in this case, the answer is yes. I also think it's why you have 3 Final Four teams from last year coming to this tournament. You have a blue blood in Duke. These are teams that, if we're going to get into it more, but if you filled out a bracket for March right now and you put these teams in the Final Four, I'd be like, okay, I could see it. I maybe don't agree with it, but I could see it for sure. Also, this championship is taking place in Vegas, which I think shouldn't be overlooked, as well as the men's, but they're going to play in the Aces Michelob Ultra Arena. We know that they bring out fans very well. Vegas is kind of becoming this bastion of fandom and sports events. So that's also a pretty big deal to bring this level of tournament to that kind of area.
100% that you are really, your focal point. And it just kind of shows, I think it's so indicative of the changes that we're experiencing in college sports, that if you're making the trip for the Players Era tournament, you could bet on these games. These players are getting paid to do it. And look, you don't have to love it. You can be right, wrong, or indifferent about how you feel about this tournament. But it is, I think, a perfect example of the changes and in college sports and the new era of college sports that we're living in. Overall, if it's the payoff and the payday that these teams are getting, and that's how and why we're getting some of these really great matchups. Like you mentioned, South Carolina, UCLA, and Texas, 3 teams that vied for a national championship last year. And then you add in Duke, Kara Lawson, who's now the U.S. women's national team coach, Toby Fournier, who's one of the most exciting young players in women's college basketball, a legitimate blue blood. Like, we're getting those 4 teams. If we're getting those 4 teams because they're getting paid to do it, then so be it. Like, great. Enjoy it. Enjoy the check. I'm just glad that we get these awesome matchups in a week that's great for the sport. A week that maybe a lot of people are turning their attention to college basketball for the first time. Like, maybe some people are starting to turn the page from football season to college basketball season. And this is their first kind of taste of the 2025-2026 season. So let's get into it. Some of these matchups. We'll have South Carolina, Texas, UCLA, Duke. What are you most looking forward to in some of these games and these teams?
Well, the semifinals is South Carolina and Duke, and then Texas and UCLA. So I think those are some pretty good matchups to start out. We've mentioned this a few times. I don't mean to beat a poor Duke offense into submission, but that South Carolina Duke game is a rematch of the regional final last year that a lot of us maybe didn't enjoy sitting through. Very defensive minded. It was 54-50. So maybe we'll see a little bit of a different result there. Texas and UCLA, also very interesting. These are 2 teams that have Final Four aspirations again, as we said. Yeah. On the Texas side, we're going to get more into players, but I think their combination of Rory Harmon and Madison Booker, I want to see if their bigs can really stop Lauren Betts, or maybe just keep one person on her and play defense that way.
Another team in Texas that is fine playing these 50-48 kind of games. Like, they're totally fine playing these defensive-minded, slog it out kind of games. You bring up a good point, stopping Lauren Betts. I don't know if anyone can stop Lauren Betts, but can you keep Lauren Betts in check enough and long enough that you can score enough to overcome this UCLA team? But we've got these matchups are star-studded. This tournament is star-studded. If you are only going to watch a handful of games, this holiday weekend, if you are unlike my family, who is just totally content watching college football, NFL, and college basketball games all weekend and Thanksgiving, if your family, if you have a turkey trot family, which T's and P's, first of all, if you have a turkey trot family, we're a mimosa family. If you only have a limited amount of time to watch some of these games this weekend, these are the games to watch.
Yeah, just these are the games that you're going to want to watch. They are Wednesday, so a lot of people are going to be preparing for Thanksgiving. They will have it on in the background. It's Thursday night, so it is going to be some competition with the NFL, but possibly those don't always overlap. Also, the potential of that championship matchup and what it could mean. I mean, like we said, we've kind of said this repeatedly, but this could be a championship game matchup in a championship game on Thanksgiving. That matters for TV ratings. It matters for these teams. It is a big deal. And definitely, if you're carving out time, this is what you're carving out time for.
Carving, no pun intended. carving out time for basketball games, and
I
we're
got
carving
you.
turkey. Happy Thanksgiving. The puns will continue to flow. All right, in this matchup, or in this tournament, excuse me, the first matchup will get 2 o'clock Eastern time on Wednesday, like Cass mentioned. We've got Texas and UCLA. Madison Booker will probably dominate a majority of the conversation when we talk about Texas basketball. SEC Player of the Year last year. She is Texas's leading scorer. She's averaging 17 points a game. She can rebound, averaging 6 rebounds per game. But I think Rory Harmon is another player to keep an eye on. It almost feels like, if you have your Batman and your Robin kind of duo, Madison Booker is going to be your Batman. But Batman can't be Batman without Robin. And that's exactly what Rory Harmon is, in my opinion, Cass, to Madison Booker.
They've worked so well together really ever since Madison Booker's freshman year. And I've reported out this story in a few different ways over the last 2 years. But Rory Harmon injuring her ACL and going out forced Madison Booker, freshman, into the point guard position that she had not really played. I think she told me maybe once in 8th grade or something. But Vic Schaefer believed in her. Rory Harmon took on a coaching hat. And I think that has really helped them up until this point. Now, Rory Harmon is coming back for a 5th year. She did miss time with that ACL. She does not have the brace this year. I kind of want to see her do a little bit more scoring. That's what we saw before she injured her ACL. She really did have a National Player of the Year campaign going at that point. But at the same time, Texas just looks a little different this year. Kyla Oldacre is really going to have to shoulder a lot of the presence inside, and she has. They have 2 really young, strong guards in Jordan Lee and Brianna Preston. This is a team that also has been dinged in the past for not shooting a lot of threes. Didn't matter. They made the Final Four. Maybe it's not the most fun thing to ever watch, but they want to do better at that. And they do have some players who are going to be able to do that. And that's going to be key when you're going up against a UCLA team.
Yeah, I mean, that's the identity of Texas. They don't shoot a ton, but that is what eventually got them to the Final Four. You bring up Kyla Oldacre. She feels like kind of a do-it-all, kind of big. But in this game, would you say, going up against Lauren Betts, I mean, UCLA's big. I mean, you could say one of the best bigs, if not the best big in the country. She's 6'7". Kyla Oldacre at 6'6". Is she the X factor or the key for Texas going up against Lauren Betts?
She absolutely could. I think any player who can guard Lauren Betts in that way and make it difficult, deny the pass, make it tricky for her to decide where to kick it out is going to be a key player. Whether it's Kyla Oldacre or someone else, Lauren Betts is top of the scouting report. And then you have to just hope, if you can shut her down, that others don't beat you sometimes. And obviously we've talked about Gianna Neepkins. This will be a huge test for both teams, for UCLA, for Texas.
Gianna Neepkins, transfer from Utah, been huge for UCLA so far this season. And obviously Lauren Betts. Lauren Betts, 6'7", one of the best players in the country. She is becoming one of the, star players, or already is one of the star players in women's college basketball. I also look at Gabby Jaquez. Looking at these two teams, Cass, they remind me so much of each other. They each have a big. They have scoring depth. Their bigs play different roles. But on paper, or at least just looking at the rosters, not in the way that they want to win games. UCLA is maybe a little bit more offensive-minded, but it feels like their rosters are so comparable. Roster depth, Gabby Jaquez averaging 16 points a game. Lauren Betts right there at 15 points a game. I'm fascinated by this matchup. Not the only one that we are going to get in the Players Area Championship. Also Duke and South Carolina. You brought it up, a rematch of what we saw in the NCAA tournament this past year. Who are you keeping an eye on this one?
Well, I think I'm keeping an eye on Duke, and if they can bounce back from what's been some tricky early season games. I mean, that loss to West Virginia was pretty embarrassing, honestly. And Kara Lawson called out effort by a lot of players. If you look at Duke's schedule, especially not knowing at this point, how quality the ACC is going to be top to bottom, just with some of the struggles they have, like this is going to be a huge game for them to try and establish, the resume that they want to have come March. I also think when you're talking about playing South Carolina for the past couple of years, it has always been, maybe you don't win, but what does it tell you about your team? How are you leveling up to what has become the standard? I think this means more to Duke than it necessarily does for South Carolina.
Duke. I was starting the season 3-3. I didn't have that on my bingo card. And I know that Kara Lawson and Duke didn't have that on their bingo cards either. Taking an early season loss to Baylor, you can live with that. Taking a loss to West Virginia, and you put up less than 50 points. It's a little bit harder to rationalize. And that's no disrespect to West Virginia in the slightest, but that's all based off of preseason expectations for this Duke team. Take a loss to South Florida. It's not necessarily a get-back opportunity against South Carolina, a team that looks like they are in midseason form at this point when you have Joyce Edwards putting up 20 points per game. But I think on the South Carolina side of things, Cass, if I'm looking at an individual player, there's so many players that we've learned to know, or, grown to know and grown to love in South Carolina, players that have stepped up big time, whether it's in the regular season or the postseason. I'm talking about Joyce Edwards, talking about Tessa Johnson, Raven Johnson, and what she does for this team defensively. But if there's a team or a name that's maybe not necessarily a household name for the South Carolina team, it's Medina Okot, the transfer from Mississippi State, who's been averaging about 11 rebounds a game. She's been huge defensively for the South Carolina team, yet another team that is defensive minded.
Yeah, we've talked continuously about South Carolina. Their guards, we kind of thought were going to be the focal point, and clearly their forwards have been able to do a good job in that point. I think they'll probably overwhelm Duke. If I'm looking ahead into maybe potential championships on Thursday night, the one I'm looking to is not like a sexy pick, but Tania Latson. If it's South Carolina and UCLA in the past has had an issue with guards just really getting loose and taking advantage. And maybe that's the game plan, right? Let Juju Watkins get hers and someone else will have to be the one to beat us. I mean, they haven't always lost this way. But if that's the matchup, which would be a really enticing matchup, we can get into why, but I think it's Tania Latson. And if she can have a huge scoring game from the backcourt.
Which she's capable of doing. At least we saw that last year at Florida State, the nation's leading scorer. And I was so excited to see the addition of Tania Latson to this team and kind of that offensive firepower that she could add. But you mentioned it, how that could be a fascinating matchup. Break it down for us.
So South Carolina and UCLA, if that is the matchup, it is a rematch of last November's matchup in Los Angeles. And it was the game that UCLA won. It was the only loss that South Carolina took of the season, and it snapped their 43-game winning streak that stretched back through their championship season. That was really kind of the game that asserted UCLA as a champion contender. And you kind of hear this, right, like throughout the years in any sport, no matter what. Like, you want your get back. You want to have revenge for something that you did not like. And there are a lot of players coming back for South Carolina. So I think that would be a very interesting storyline game. South Carolina and Texas, that's an SEC matchup. They will meet, So early SEC look of two favorites. They will meet in South Carolina on January 15th. But obviously this would be a little teaser. Last year, I think we saw 3 matchups.
We saw 3.
They had
2 in the regular season, and then they faced off in the SEC championship game. And remember, Cass, that was not an SEC championship game that came without a little bit of controversy. That it came down to like the tiebreakers for the SEC championship game. It was like the first 5 bullet points were all even between South Carolina and Texas. It ultimately came down to a coin flip. And then there was a coin flip TV show on the SEC network, of course, because that's just, what we do. We make everything a TV show, of course. And there was drama that Greg Sankey didn't show the coin before he flipped it. There was, conspiracy theorists that assumed that both sides had the South Carolina logo, that Vic Schaefer called it out a little bit, that Vic Schaefer was upset that the SEC tournament was in Greenville, South Carolina, which is funny because nobody ever complains about how the men's tournament is in Nashville, Tennessee, because Vanderbilt hasn't won it the same clip that South Carolina's won it on the women's side. So yes, these two teams are awfully familiar with one another after last season.
Yes. And I think Texas played late, the semifinal late the day before, right?
I believe so. Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
Uh-huh.
But so that's a good one. And
Lots
then
of
you
drama.
have, if Duke gets through, let's give it up for Kara Lawson. If Duke gets through, you have Duke and Texas, which could be two very defensive games. Or you could have
that score
Duke
would be 25 to 23.
Probably.
Yeah, it's going to be like a football score.
I don't think that does well for anybody. But if you have Duke and UCLA, you have another instance of, how does UCLA fare against a very good defense? Because to Duke's credit, very good defense.
Very good defense. And a huge test for Duke as well. A huge opportunity for Duke. A huge opportunity. I think I said a Duke opportunity. It would be a Duke opportunity, but a huge opportunity for Duke as well. Duke's going to have to start to put some positive notches in the win-loss column and for the resume. I talked to Kara Lawson before the season. I was like, whoa, a lot of tough games on your schedule there, Kara. You have Baylor, you have West Virginia, you have South Carolina, you have LSU. Let's not forget, too, Duke's got LSU coming up on their schedule as well. They've got Virginia Tech on the schedule. That there are a lot of really tough games. I asked her why. Some coaches might say, like, hey, look, we're just trying to get to a few wins, trying to knock the rust off a little bit. And she said, I want to know what's wrong with my team. I want to be able to diagnose the things that have gone wrong for my team early in the season. So that way, once we get into ACC play, we're much more prepared to go through the grind of an ACC schedule. And I totally see that line of thinking. I totally understand that iron sharpens iron, but at some point, you're going to have to start winning some of these tough matchups. So I think it might be the most important tournament of all of these teams that have championship hopes and championship expectations, championship level rosters. This might be the most important opportunity for Duke.
Yeah, like I said, we don't know what the ACC is going to look like. Notre Dame, we talked about last week, isn't instilling tons of confidence. This is not the ACC of the past. And so if it's not the ACC of the past, if you don't have teams that are high in net ranking, right? That's going to hurt Duke in the long run when you're looking at seeding specifically, because seeding does matter. So if you're looking at South Carolina, whomever, they will still play. Here's the thing about this championship as well. There is a third place game. So they're going to get a second matchup against one of these elite teams. So you have those two, you have LSU. This 3-game stretch is really going to be the decider for Duke and what their season will look like come March, because we hear it all the time, it is about matchups, and you want to increase your standing as much as possible to get in an advantageous matchup.
And in that same breath, if Duke doesn't get these opportunities early in the season, they have an entire ACC schedule coming up to boost their postseason resume. Where it stands right now, the Big Ten, and look, any of that can change. It's still so early in the season. Where it stands right now, the Big Ten doesn't look nearly as deep as the SEC. South Carolina and Texas, they're going to get plenty of these opportunities against each other, against LSU, against Kentucky, against Ole Miss, against Tennessee. I mean, the list goes on and on and on of these in-conference matchups in the SEC. Duke's going to get opportunities in the ACC. Now, you'd want to get those wins in the non-con, but you still have some of those opportunities against great teams in conference play. Is UCLA going to have the same number of opportunities once Big Ten play rolls around? How much more of an opportunity does UCLA have to boost their resume in conference play versus maybe South Carolina, Texas, and Duke in the SEC and ACC respectively?
I mean, UCLA has already played some top teams, right? I don't have their schedule in front of me, but
yeah, they've played. They've played Oklahoma, played and beaten Oklahoma and North Carolina, and a South Florida team that just knocked off Duke.
Yeah, I mean, I think we just said it. It's the most This is the most important for Duke. Like we talked last week that Michigan was probably going to push UCLA. You know, we just saw last week, like Iowa upset Baylor in a really strong game in which for a stretch, they did not have three of their starters. UCLA is obviously going to have, you know, more opportunities coming up. I mean, it's important for all of these teams, but we just said it's probably most important for Duke.
Yeah, it's not put up or shut up time for Duke because it is still so early and you still have so many opportunities. But when we're talking about the non-con, like this is the perfect opportunity for Duke to prove that they are not who their record says they are, at least at this point. Any final thoughts on Players Era Championship? Because this is a good one. This is the juicy one.
Yeah, this is the championship that you're going to want to watch. Also, keep an eye out for who's going to play in it next year. If it continues to be these top level teams, I mean, you're really going to see a Final Four in November. It's like what it is.
I'm so excited. I'm so ready for it. But we have so many more multi-team events. Thank you very much. Not tournaments coming up on Feast Week. Maybe outside of the Players Era tournament, what are some matchups or some players that you are looking forward to watching?
I think the Cancun Challenge is going to be huge in terms of mid-majors that might upset your team in March. So mid-majors who right now are building a resume, but also that could make noise come March. You have South Dakota State, Summit League favorite year in, year out. I mean, this is a team that when you get to the NCAA tournament time, like you are on the lookout for. They will play in that one. They went unbeaten in the Summit League last year for the fourth time in 5 years. And that fifth year, they only lost one game.
Jeez.
So this is a strong contender. You know, like don't overlook the mid-majors. The Ivy League, I don't think is going to be quite the same as a year ago when they got 3 bids, but Columbia is in this event. They returned Riley Weiss and Perry Page from a team that won in the first round of the NCAA tournament last year. You have Richmond, and I'm going to let you go into more about Richmond because I know you're excited about this, but huge mid-major to watch.
Right now where it stands, they are the mid-major to watch, in my opinion. When you bring up the Cancun Challenge, we'll have Richmond take on TCU, who's been rolling. Remember Olivia Miles, who was such a huge part of that Notre Dame team last year? She transfers to TCU. But that Richmond-TCU matchup, if this is maybe like you're getting into your women's college hoops kind of brain, don't overlook Richmond as just like, oh, that's a mid-major kind of team. Like Richmond was a ranked team going into this season. Richmond led UCLA at halftime in the NCAA tournament last year. And a player that I'm watching on this Richmond team is Maggie Dugan. She made a name for herself last year in the tournament, and she's followed it up with a really strong start to this season. She's averaging 25 points a game, 11 rebounds, 6 assists. She is such a do-it-all kind of person. And Richmond has a 4-1 start. I mean, they lost to Texas. Look, it was a 30-point loss to Texas. Like, if you want to talk about yourself as a tournament team, like, you're going to have to fare better against some of these other tournament teams. But overall, this is a perfect opportunity for Richmond to prove that, look, a 30-point loss to Texas early in the season is not who we are, and nor is that anything to scoff at. So this is a great opportunity, in my opinion, for this Richmond team to put up a good fight against TCU. Honestly, Cass, if it comes in the form of a loss, but a close loss where Richmond looks really good and Maggie Dugan goes off because she has the ability to go off in any given game, I think that's huge for Richmond.
Yeah, I do think it's the last strong chance they have to boost their resume. You know, when you're a mid-major, like you're not getting a lot of credit for what you do in the conference. You're getting credit for what you do in the non-con. They didn't fare that well against Texas. They do play Fairfield in December, and that's a team that's ranked fairly highly by her hoop stats. So maybe they'll have some nice net ranking by the end of the season. But certainly, like, we have to see how they do against TCU. And when you look back, like that could be the difference between a higher seed and a lower seed should they win the Summit League and get the automatic bid.
Yeah, 100%. And we look at this TCU team, the addition of Olivia Miles. Like, what is the ceiling, do you think, for TCU at this point in what we have seen from them?
Well, the ceiling is the Final Four. They want to get back to the region, taking the region, getting to the Final Four. I think it's kind of I don't want to say one for one. Olivia Miles and Haley Van Lith are not the same. When you talk about their bigs, not the same as a Sedona Prince. I think Olivia Miles is a much better passer, but certainly Sedona Prince was in college for like 7 years. And even though she wasn't playing all of those years, it was a lot.
It was a long time.
She played with Sabrina Ionescu, I'm pretty sure, or at least was like on that roster at Oregon.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And Sabrina's time at Oregon feels like many moons ago. Like I was a different
She already
woman.
won a championship.
Yeah, right.
The college basketball was a different woman when Sabrina was at
She was
Oregon.
a girl, and now she's a woman.
She was, we want to do like a quick glimpse back at the moment. Sabrina Ionescu was calling out ESPN for not actually giving like any airtime to her triple doubles and what the women's game was doing. This was pre that 2021 tournament where Sedona Prince called out the weight room and here we are.
And that was, oh wow, Sedona Prince's days on TikTok when maybe she wasn't a little bit more problematic than she is now these days. What a time. And with that, any other matchups that you're looking forward to watching, or tournaments that you think, or matchups and tournaments that have massive tournament implications?
I will add one more team to that tournament. Green Bay also voted as the preseason favorite to win the Horizon League. They're going to need a good showing here for their conference. Redshirt sophomore Megan Schultz, she moved into a starting role this year. She's leading the team with about 17 points per game. I do want to preface all of these stats, as I always do, with like very small sample size, and they're very much based on who they're playing. But in terms of what else to watch, I think a one and done MTE that you want to keep an eye on is the Puerto Rico Shootout. And that is because we're going to see Maryland and Kentucky play each other. These are ranked teams. These are teams that could go pretty deep into the tournament, certainly have aspirations. It is the first big test for each of them. Players to call out. For Maryland, this is another team of transfers. Brenda Fries has done a really good job of this. But Aluchi Akanawa, who used to play for Duke, has really taken over in Maryland offensively. Going to leave that alone. Yarden Garzon is a good floor spacer for them. She hasn't been shooting from three as well, but small sample sizes. And then for Kentucky, I'm a big fan of Clara Strack. Yeah. I know that Kenny Brooks is a big fan of Clara Strack and has talked about her a lot, but she is averaging 3.3 blocks per game. It is 6th in the nation, and 1.5 steals per game.
And Clara Strack came over to Kentucky from Virginia Tech, followed Kenny Brooks, similar to Georgia Amore. We saw her come over from Virginia Tech to follow Kenny Brooks. And I think one of my favorite stories from last season was that relationship between Kenny Brooks and Georgia Amore. I talked to Kenny Brooks so many times, and his face would just beam talking about Georgia Amore. He was like, yeah, like that's my little monster. That's my mini-me. Like that is my girl. And Georgia Amore, just every time she talked about Kenny Brooks, would just absolutely beam about how much he meant to her. Feels like Clara Strack is maybe that next, go-to focal point player for this Kentucky team now that Georgia Amore has made that next step to the W.
Yeah, absolutely. And playing in the SEC is not easy. I don't think anyone thinks Kentucky is going to win the SEC, but you want to see them be competitive in the SEC. And I think this is going to be a big early test for both teams to actually see what they have when it becomes important.
Resume boosting opportunity for both of these teams, especially when you bring up Kentucky. Look, when we talk about the hierarchy of the SEC, Kentucky's not in that first tier. I think Kentucky is kind of starting to break through to be that, that next program up in the SEC. So picking up wins, big time wins, Power 4 wins wherever they can, I think it's going to be massive for this Kentucky team. Just a little bit of a roundup of things that we are watching. Obviously, the Players Era Championship, Texas and UCLA tips off all of the action 2:00 on Wednesday. South Carolina Duke follows. We'll have Maryland versus Kentucky in the other multi-team event, 6:30 p.m. That game happening in Puerto Rico. And of course, we'll have Tennessee and UCLA. If we're going to look outside of maybe some of the Feast Week action, some of these tournament/multi-team event action happening, Tennessee and UCLA, a real really intriguing matchup happening on November 30th. So get ahead of that since we won't see you until after Thanksgiving. We'll have a reaction to all of these games, our thoughts, our takeaways, things to watch, and things that we took away from all of these games coming up on the next edition of Hoops 360. And remember, you can send us any of your questions, comments, concerns, any things you want us to touch on to hoops360@yahoosports.com. We'll make sure to get to as many of your questions, comments, and concerns as we possibly can coming up on the next edition of Hoops 360. For Cassandra Negley, I am Caroline Fenton. Check us out on the Yahoo Sports YouTube page and wherever you get your podcasts.